Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you're listening to the podcast today. Welcome to the first episode of the Actuarial Agenda's In the Know podcast series, where we look to speak to industry experts and thought leaders to gauge a unique and insightful perspective of the industry. We're joined by myself, John Okafor, BWD's very own and client director, Rob Hammond, and Linley Baker, director at UNAM and best-selling author. Good evening, well, good afternoon to Linley. How are you guys doing today?
Great, thanks.
So, let the listeners know a little bit more about yourself, Linley, and tell them a little bit about your overview of your background.
When I was in high school, I loved math, and my dad told me that if I wanted to use math, make a lot of money, and not be discriminated against, be an actuary. And my first question was, why would anyone discriminate against me? But I was kind of naive. I did read the newspaper, and in it had separate job wanted columns for men and women. And so I might have been more aware of it, but I wasn't. But I looked into it. I majored in it in college, went to the Wharton School of Business, and continued just to love it. And I've enjoyed working in the field. I got my FSA, and then I decided to focus on being a mother. So as John mentioned, I took 19 years off of corporate actuarial work and spent most of that time with the children. We can talk about other things I did during those years later.
Yeah.
Eventually, 12, I came back to corporate actuarial, and I've had a lot of leadership positions and really enjoyed being back in the profession again as well.
No, really good. And let me talk about a little bit about your early career. When I got into sort of the actuarial industry, it's not necessarily an industry that is well marketed in terms of your traditional, maybe like more corporate banking roles, like investment banking analysts. How did you find sort of getting into that sort of actuarial profession? You know, not many people may have heard of the actuarial profession. What was it that was the draw to you?
Right. So when I was 13, I took the typical test they give you at school to try to figure out what professions might be good for you. And I don't think actuary was one of the possible outcomes because it didn't show up at all. The number one thing was math professor at college, and I really didn't want that. I was pretty sure it didn't fit me because I don't really like the research and inventing new ways to do things and 17th dimensional equations. But that wasn't what I loved. I loved something practical. So when I found out that you could use really complicated math and apply it to business as an actuary, then that's what really sparked my interest.
No, of course. And Rob, yeah.
Yeah, sorry. And Linley, how old were you when your dad mentioned being an actuary?
I was 15.
15, yeah. And why had he heard of it?
He worked for an insurance company, and
Okay.
he was an underwriter, not an actuary. Maybe if he had found out about it, he might have been an actuary.
You're living his dream.
Yeah. And then, but I took my first exam at age 17 and I passed. And then I was able to get an internship at age 18. And I was very curious about that because I knew I loved studying it, but I was curious, will I like the job? And I really liked the job. So I could go back to college and be confident in my major. And I was thankful for that.
Yeah. And did you get the FSA before you took that break? So you're FSA qualified, yeah. And how did you find those? How did you find the exams? Sorry, Linley. How did you find the early years doing the exams while you were working as well?
Well, it's quite a challenge. In the 1980s, I graduated from high school and college and got my FSA at age 25, married and had 3 kids. And so when I'm like watching Jeopardy and they have a topic about the 80s, I understand why I know nothing about what happened in the world.
Yeah.
it required all my focus to do those other things.
And let's talk to talk a little bit about the exams. I speak to a lot of analysts who may be fairly early on in their careers. Do you sacrifice that work-life balance in terms of, you know, when you get through those exams, you can, there's a fairly stable and safe and potentially financially rewarding career after that? Is there much work-life balance, or do you tend to have to sacrifice that to pass as soon as possible?
So I wanted to pass as soon as possible. I have a graphic in my book, if I can find it quickly, maybe not. But it's like there were 3 big things in my life while I was working on my FSA exams, because when I had about 2 or 3 exams left, I got married. And when I had my first child, I still had 2 exams left. And I thought, you know, I gotta have to pick 2 out of the 3.
Yeah.
Being a mom, or a full-time mom, doing the exams and working. And so I did take a short break, not before the 19-year break, just to finish up those exams. And because it was like a pick 2. I can't do everything all at once. And I know there are people that try to work full-time and do their exams, and they have kids, and my hat's off to them, because that is super hard.
And to talk a little bit about having when you had your 3 kids and, you know, coming up to that sort of 19-year break, typically we see a lot of women in the corporate industry having to pick the professional life or raising the family. Was that professional life something that you always wanted, and you knew early on that, no, even though I might have to raise a family, I know that I can ascend the sort of levels that I want to in my career?
Good question. I absolutely love my career, and I always thought that I would be able to come back, even though I didn't have any example of anyone who had done it. So I relied on hope. I decided, well, I hope I can come back, but I was making a conscious choice to dedicate myself to my kids at that time. But during those 19 years, I thought I might be able to do something to help it happen. So I volunteered with the Society of Actuaries Education and Examination Committee throughout that time, and even before my break. And that was a way to keep up with the concepts and what's changing in the profession. One of the topics I was involved in was regulation and tax for life insurance. And over the last 20 years, there's been a lot of change in that. And so that was very helpful. And I also, sometimes I work part-time at universities teaching actuarial science, which got me deep into the formulas. I actually was living with my family in China in 1994 when they were looking for their very first actuarial professor in the history of the country, because, you know, China was moving more toward a market economy. People can own their own factory, and instead of the government, if it falls down or burns down, now they need insurance to cover it. So if you need insurance, you need actuaries, of course. So they had put together a class of 30 brilliant mathematicians to become their country's first actuaries, and I got the opportunity to teach that, and that was really super fun. And as I said, they were smart. All but one of them passed the exam. So yeah, it's a lot higher pass ratio than average. And they were taking the exam in English, even though their first language was Chinese.
Were you teaching in English? I take it.
I was, because I don't know Chinese. I know 4 languages, one of which is not Chinese.
Yeah.
But it was good for the students, because then that forced them to think in English. And I did have an assistant professor from the local faculty who spoke Chinese. So sometimes they could try to clarify things with him. And he was pretty good at English and better than the students. And so sometimes he would clarify things with me. But at the beginning of the semester, I just started speaking very slowly and sped up as we went along.
And
That probably helps with English speaking students as well, to be honest. You mentioned there your other languages. Where did you pick up those other languages, and or was it a love of language that made you learn those?
Well, it's mostly a love of wanting friends. So I lived in Japan before I lived in China, and this was for my then husband. He was an engineer, and he was being moved around the world to help different factories and areas. And in Japan, I did learn Japanese, but we were only there 3 years, and that's not long enough for me to learn Japanese. So when we moved to China, I kept learning Japanese. China had a lot of Japanese people, so I could have a Japanese tutor and Japanese friends and things. And with Japanese and Chinese writing being so similar, I was pretty sure I would just get everything jumbled up in my head if I tried to learn Chinese. So I skipped that. And then later we moved to France, and French was my high school language, and so I was happy to refresh that. And then when I worked for MetLife in the early 2010s, I had a team of actuaries that some of which were in Buenos Aires, Argentina. And they had to learn English to work. But I decided that was a chance for me to learn Spanish in solidarity with them. And I think it helped them learn English and be comfortable asking questions, because I would ask them similar things. I said, if I say anything wrong or weird, let me know.
And one thing, I've picked up, you live in so many different countries, and whilst, maths is always going to be maths, did you find there was cultural differences in terms of how each country wants to do their sort of actual work when you went over to China, and when you're speaking to the sort of Argentinian actuaries, were there sort of any differences you noticed? Oh, I didn't know you could do it like that, sort of thing.
The math was pretty much the same. In Argentina, though, just to get the bachelor's degree level, they had to do a thesis research project to qualify. And like with the Society of Actuaries, you don't have to be able to write much in order to become fully qualified. You calculate, you report on it, you explain, all the laws and things like that. So that was a hurdle especially for people that love numbers instead of people who love words, that some of them were still working on after they had been hired. But as far as the actuarial calculations, that's pretty much the same. I think a lot of it is driven by the major modeling platforms that are pretty international, and I think that might have standardized it more lately than perhaps in the past.
Yeah, no, of course. I don't know, Rob, what were you going to say something there?
No.
What I was, it's funny how you say about the actuaries like the numbers, and it's the wordy exams, and the thought of having to do a thesis would scare many a UK actuary off. But yeah, there is, the UK, many of the exams, the later exams, a lot more wordy than certainly the earlier exams, and there's communications paper and that kind of thing now as well. But yeah, it's the maths is the same all around the world, John.
Yeah, no, of course.
I guess Linley's discovered that these different areas that you can work in, different countries. Can we ask you about when you came back into industry after those 19 years, Linley? John asked you, was it something you always wanted to do? And you said that you were hoping that you'd be able to do it. How easy was it to do, or difficult?
Yeah, so this is my first book, Don't Be Afraid to Do What You Really Want to Do. Reach All Your Life Dreams. And it has several chapters on the difficulty imagine a dentist or a doctor or any kind of profession coming back after a generation. You would think, well, no, they probably don't know what's going on anymore. And so there were a lot of people that I applied to that I never heard from. and there were, but I had kept up, as I said, by teaching and by working with the Society of Actuaries. And so there were some companies that were willing to look at me, and I actually really lucked out because MAAA had just acquired Alico, and they were looking for actuaries who spoke an Asian language, a European language, and English. And I did.
There can't be many of them. Yeah.
Oh yeah, so kind of.
Most of them don't have English as their first language. So it might be Swahili or Chinese. And so it was helpful for my first language to be English. I already have that one down. And so they were willing to interview me, and they hired me kind of as a experiment. Like, neither of us knew if it was going to work, but they were going to give me a chance. And they said, well, how long do you think it would take you to ramp back up? And I said, no, maybe 4 months. And he was comfortable with that. He saw what I had done before my break, and he thought I would have great things to bring to the table. And so, but I kept up with the theory and the calculations. I kept up with the new trends, new laws, but there was no way I could keep up with the day-to-day actuarial work. And that, of course, had changed. For example, I had thought about, I wonder what kind of calculator they give actuaries these days. And they gave me all my stuff, and I sat down in my cubicle, and there was no calculator. And I'm like, okay, I guess maybe we just use Excel. And so, like, my expectations were off. And then there were some things mostly related to technology that I felt like should be super simple questions, stupid questions that I would be embarrassed to ask. And because some of my kids who had been to college recently, they would know. I knew because they had used that software, or they would have known how to use computers for that. And so I'd have a conversation with myself in my cube. I'd say, great, I don't know how to do this. This is a stupid question. I don't want to ask this question. I can't do my job if I don't know the answer to this question. And so finally, I decided that I had to ask those questions. I would save up a few, and I made a rule so I could live with myself that I could only ask the same stupid question one time. And so that means I had to make sure I understood the answer, and I recorded it so I didn't have to ask again. And then I got through that. But it was shorter than 4 months before I was really contributing. And in 7 months, they promoted me to manager. And that was not just what I did before my break. It was also what I gained during my break.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
You can learn skills that can help you in business that you can't learn sitting at a desk all day, every day, like organizing things for the schools or a music festival or a church and community. You learn to deal with people. You learn to organize. I mean, I learned to organize just organizing my kids and helping, figuring out, like, what do we pack in our suitcases in August because we're not coming home till June. That I could be an effective manager. So I brought that to the table as well. And that's part of the emphasis of my book, is to help people realize, and employers, that there's value that can't be valued from the break, and that you shouldn't just not consider a candidate because of what they've chosen to do during their adult life.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's nice that you mentioned that, because there'll be a lot of women that'll be listening to this podcast, like understanding how to balance that and maybe becoming a work returner. When you explain that sort of career break, do you think that employers frowned upon it? Was it something? Did you ever think you were doubting yourself in terms of, I might not be able to get the sort of position I'm looking for? Or did you think, no, I know I've done this, I've been able to keep up with the theory, I'm still involved in the actual profession? How did you find it, and how did you think you were viewed when you were a work returner?
Well, it depended on how open-minded the company was. I was actually about 2 weeks away from applying for a job as manager at the local taco restaurant, because it was several months before I actually started to get interviews, and because everyone was wanting recent experience, and I was just screaming in my mind, how can I get recent experience if no one will hire me?
Yeah.
And so that part was really frustrating. And even 5 years after my return, I was applying to other companies because I wanted a new opportunity. And there were some companies even after I had a fabulous resume of things I did with MetLife. Like, we don't understand the gaps in your resume. We don't want to interview her. And I mean, there was this one company that they were French speaking, and they needed a life products manager, and life insurance is my specialty. And I thought, you're not seeing my value. But through it all, I had confidence in myself. I knew I had something to offer if I could find somebody that was willing to give me a chance.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the word there is value. And I think now things are shifting in terms of the career breaks used to be frowned upon. Now it's actually, what have you done in that career breaks? Because it's giving you a whole set of skills and a whole set of perspective that naturally, had you have just gone through the traditional actual route right through to where you are now, you may not have gained that sort of life experiences, which is so valuable for companies, because profitable companies benefit from people that have a range of thoughts, a range of experiences, different perspectives. So it's something that, for me, I definitely would be talking to clients, that people that might have had career breaks, taking time out to raise families, they've got a unique set of skill that you just can't find anywhere else.
Yes. And another big thing they have is enthusiasm, because I had all this pent up enthusiasm for doing the actuarial work because I hadn't been able to apply it. And people that stay in the career that whole time, they might not have as much enthusiasm.
Yeah.
They're wanting to have a break. Linley, you said before it'd be nice or John said it'd be nice if some women were listening to this about having some confidence in yourself, and it'd be really nice, John, as well, if some employers would be listening to the messages here about look at the gaps in the resume. Don't just ignore them. Actually, the life skills that you gained during that period could be really valuable.
Of course. I know that we're talking a lot about the break, but it's such a rare thing to see. But at the time, people with that sort of career break, at the time you left and the time you joined back into the profession, what are the sort of the big shifts you had seen? Because I think that you got such a big perspective, because it must have been night and day from when you left to when you returned, and you're like, oh, like this has changed, we do things like this now.
Well, a lot of the technology has changed. One thing that started was town halls. I had no idea what that meant. I knew in the town where I grew up, I just never went to my town meetings. And so when I was invited to a work town hall, I'm like, no, I'll just get my work done. And someone had to explain to me, no, this is a very important meeting for everybody. But my first meeting that I organized at MetLife was with a lot of IT people. And I got in the room and there were about 7 people and I was the only woman. And I sat there saying, what hasn't happened in these 20 years?
Yeah, absolutely.
They did have like some IT managers that just happened not to be in that particular meeting, and they do value women quite well at MetLife, but I haven't seen as much progress as I had expected in the leadership level of actuaries in that time.
Yeah, and it's something that Rob and I, when we speak to clients, they always say, like, how can we engage more women into the profession? How can we not only just take up the profession, but also like get them in sort of the senior management positions? You're a director, what would you say needs to happen so that companies actually look within in terms of finding that sort of women in leadership? Because companies I've seen in industry so far maybe hiring across, but not necessarily looking within the sort of talent pools that they have.
Right. Well, Unum is another company that really values diversity in gender and in many ways. Since I joined them last fall, they promoted one of their female actuaries to be the chief risk officer of the company, and I was happy to see that, to have that opportunity. But I think a lot of it would probably stem more from building that culture and changing people's mindset that women have good skills. And in researching for my book, I learned that the worst corporate decisions were the ones that were made by all men
Yep.
or all women.
Yeah.
When you have both genders in a boardroom, then, or whatever meeting, then you get that diversity of perspectives that tends to get to a better solution. So the companies that are promoting diversity of thought are really the ones getting ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. And you just touched upon the book. For the listeners that don't know the book, it's called "Don't Be Afraid to Do What You Really Want to Do, Reach All Your Dreams in Life." Talk to us about the motivations behind that and what you seek to gain writing your own book.
Well, thanks. It is available on Amazon, both as an ebook and a paperback. And I wrote it because I had a message and I wanted other people to know you can take a break. I want employers to know that a break can be valuable or at least neutral. I think the traditional mindset of breaks are bad came from like the 50s and 60s, when usually there was just one breadwinner in the family, usually the man. And if he didn't have a job, that was a problem. But nowadays, everybody gets educated, and so the mindset needs to change. And I also have a formula in the book about the things that you need to think about before your break, and things to help people come back because I didn't write the book until I was successful back in my career and got in leadership position. Because if I hadn't gone that far, then there really wasn't a message. So speaking of words versus numbers, though, I'm a numbers person, and my book requires lots of words, and I'm like, oh no. So I joined a mentoring program that was helping people write books, and they introduced us to different storytelling techniques and editors and printers, and it was early in the pandemic, so we used Zoom for a lot of that, but it was a really helpful program for someone writing their first book, so that I could understand, like, okay, you tell a true story like people tell a short story, and you have the different sections, and you have the climax, and you figure out what the climax, and then you can have an effective story. And I mean, that's something I totally missed in my actuarial education. So I'm glad that I did that, and I'm writing a new book, and now I don't need to learn this time how to write the book. I can just do it. But I'm happy that I could write the book, and I have a lot of feedback from people seeing that they can be successful in more than one area. I think the universe or God or however vibes you describe it, everybody has life dreams, things that interest them. Like one of mine is math. I love math. Why do I love math? I don't know. But we have other things people like. They like horseback riding or swimming or mountain climbing. But society tells us basically we can be really good at one thing, and everything else has to be secondary. But I think if you live a full adult life, you can spend time pursuing great things in all of your life dreams, which for me were math, motherhood, and music. And I got a master's degree in music performance when I had 6 little kids. Some people think I was crazy. And I thought, well, I really want to do this. And I just thought I would squeeze it in. But I found that it actually increased my capacity, because as I did something that I truly loved, it energized me. And I was able to be a better mother in the rest of the time when I was home. And it was a really growth experience. And I was happy I could do that.
Well, it's fantastic. And it's so insightful just speaking to an actuary that's lived such a full life in terms of that you haven't done just the traditional numbers that you expect, but you've been away, you've done the music. What was the reasoning behind just the? I've been reading your bio and I was looking into it. There's a violin performance. It just seems so left of field that you'd expect an actuary to do.
Well, I like to think about my obituary more than like a bucket list. Like a bucket list is like things to check off, fun things to do. But an obituary is like who you became. And so what do I want people to write about me when I die? And so I think the clincher for getting the music degree is I want to make sure my obituary mentions music because I love music. And so if I get a degree in music, whoever's writing my obituary should not forget that part.
Yeah. Oh, it's fantastic. Sounds like you've got a master's in motherhood, music, and math. And it also sounds like that you mentioned words and not numbers, but it sounds like in your book there may be some formulas in there and maybe a few charts and so on. So I'm sure it will appeal to lots of actuaries. But this book, I assume, is not just focused on actuarial industry. It's anybody, any industry. It's all about following your dreams and knowing that you can take a break, you can come back.
Exactly. I have actually a lot of other stories in it, maybe more than 6, of other people who have followed more than one dream and been extremely successful. Like there's an opera singer named Erin Morley, and she sings the highest notes, and she tours Europe as a soloist, and she sings at the Met Opera, and she has 3 little kids, but she feels like singing helps her be a better mother, and being a mother helps her be a better singer. And so she's able to reach both of her dreams that way. And so I wanted to put in other examples because not everyone relates to loving math.
Yeah, no, of course. Let's talk about yourself. So you're currently at UNUM, you're a director. In terms of if we had this conversation in 5 years now, where do you see yourself? Could you see yourself living in another country? Would you be doing pursuing another life dream?
Well, right now I live in Utah in the United States near my mother because she's widowed and older, and I just want to live near her. So, and I want to live here as long as she lives. So that's also affecting my career. So right now I'm limited to companies that have remote positions. UNIV is really good with remote because they actually have 3 headquarters in the United States. So it's just normal for people not to be in that physical location for whatever project you're working on. So UNIV is a particularly good fit for me, and I'm thankful to be part of them. Right now I have 2 teams that I'm running. One is mostly in Poland. So I meet with them at 6:45 a.m. my time every day. And the other one's mostly in the Eastern U.S., so we meet a little bit later. And so I like using my skills. I'm a process expert in addition to being an actuary. So if I can work on whatever process or models are the worst at that company, and fix them up and then move on to the next one, that gives me a lot of satisfaction. So that's where I'm happiest, and I don't need to become a chief anything officer, but to just make a lot of impact, that's what's meaningful to me.
Yeah, it's fantastic just hearing this, and I think a lot of people get so caught up in I need to be here by a certain time in my life, I need to have this job role, I need to be earning this salary, and while yes they'll give a lot of satisfaction and happiness in terms of your career, life is more than just your career. You want to have a balance of all things. Your family is your family, raising kids, raising them when they're children. You only get one chance at that. Your career, your profession is always going to be there. So it's fantastic to hear someone that's had a full life and had that sort of traditional career success that things were pushed on us in the past. So no, it's been fantastic to hear that, and thank you so much. I don't know what else Rob wants to add to that.
Yeah, no, No, I just wanted to thank you very much. Then it's been really interesting, and you know, I'm certainly going to go and have a read of your book, and you know, I hope people do read it. And I think the biggest thing for us is to tell employers to you know, open their doors for returners, and not and to, you know, to the time where you're not working, that actually some of the skills that you've learnt there, you know, are really valuable. It's not just about your work experience.
Right. It was important that I kept up while I was not there, because I think if I had just gotten bored after my kids grew up and thought, hey, maybe I'll be an actuary again, I don't think I would have been able to be rehired. So I don't think it really matters what you do to keep up, but that you do something.
Yeah, absolutely. Firstly, where can they find your book? And secondly, when is you mentioned the next one's coming out? When are we going to see that? When can we get our hands on that?
Oh, thank you. So this is on Amazon, and it's available in the UK, like almost all around the world, I think. Don't be afraid to do what you really want to do. Reach all your life dreams. And this is my second book. This is the internationally best-selling book. There are 17 authors, and it is about trust. It's Wickedly Smart Women. So, of course, every Wickedly Smart Women book needs at least one actuary in it. So, and about trusting intuition and transforming worlds. My upcoming book is called Betrayed, Not Trashed. And it's about keeping your mind and how to approach things, healing. So I was married for 35 years, and for most of the time he was a great guy, and then boom, he left in one day, and it was a big surprise. And so I got a counselor to help me through it, and I said, like, I'm a thinker, and I thought about like lots of things, and I've never had one thought I might get divorced. So like, you need to just tell me the topics to think about. Like, I have no idea what to do. And so my book is going to talk about it, the topics that came up and how I thought through them, so that maybe it can help someone else think through the topics. And also regarding the betrayal, I mean, this is dedicated to anyone who's ever been betrayed, and it doesn't have to be in a marriage. And because I was also betrayed at work at one point, so that's in there too. But it's like when a traitor betrays their country, then the country still has that same value.
Yeah.
Right? People seem to be able to understand that. They have new problems because some of their secrets got out or whatever, but it's the same for people. You have new problems because someone has betrayed you, but you need to remember that your value hasn't changed. That person has no right to judge you. You have great value as a person intrinsically that can't be changed by whatever other people say or do. But a lot of people get depressed when they are betrayed. And so this is try to help them mentally through that as well. So that is coming out next May on the 5th anniversary of my big betrayal.
Wow. This is impressively powerful stuff. But honestly, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. I was going to say this evening, but we're working in international time zones. But honestly, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, and it's been fantastic just to hear someone who's lived such a full life and, you know, has such life experiences to share with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So much, Linley.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, John.